Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Aksoy, who's a member of the political opposition in Turkey and a founding member of the S Generation platform. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in Turkish, which is connected to the refugee issue in Turkey. Let's first of all talk about this organization. What prompted you to start it, and what issues are you trying to deal with inside Turkey?
Hi, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, firstly, Turkey, as you know, is the major country that's been severely affected by the refugees. We have over officially 3.6, but unofficially we have around 5 million people here. Now with the Afghanis, it's a completely different number. But our platform, the S Generation platform, we formed it for a lost generation that's actually right now developing in our lands. Everybody's talking about this, Generation Z, but actually there's another generation, and it's a war-affected generation, and it's the refugee generation. In Turkish, it's refugee is sığınmacı, so it's a Turkish word for refugee, actually. So if we translate it to English, it's the refugee generation that we are actually aiming for. Now, the purpose that we did this is that we have over around 2.5 million children that are under the age of 18 living in our lands. We have over 600, 700,000 children, babies that have been born in Turkey. And what we have seen is that after 10 years of living here, there is no adaptation to Turkey. They live in ghettos, and they have no concept of the Turkish culture, but unfortunately they have no concept of also their Syrian culture, because it's only the culture that they managed to bring during the time of war. So they have no formal education. Only of the 2.5 million youth, only around 600,000 actually go to school.
And they go to, sorry, just to interrupt you there, they go to Turkish schools, presumably, so they're not following any Syrian curriculum.
No, well, you see, Turkey officially gave these people temporary protection under the AB directive, United Nations, European Union directive. So there's a place where it states that they can only benefit from state education. They cannot receive any other education. Although in the first years we saw that that until 2006. Syrian curriculum was actually given to some Syrian children, but modified Syrian curriculum. Yeah. Then they were trying to get them adapted to the Turkish curriculum, but still a very low rate is actually going to school. What's actually happening is actually they get registered, and when they get registered, they also get some education money monthly. So they get the money, but unfortunately, the participation is very low. So they're not receiving education.
Right. And the education is free, right?
Yes, in Turkey, it's free.
Okay. When did the sort of refugees start arriving in Turkey? Was it 2011, or was it a bit later into the?
No. It was in April 2011. It started by about 256 people, and then it just escalated, literally.
Right.
Literally.
I mean, the refugee, and I need to make it clear to the audience that we are going to keep this conversation completely sort of non-political. So if I'm not asking the questions that I would normally ask, it's for a very good reason. We're keeping it very much in the humanitarian sphere and just talking about the situation for particularly the Syrian refugees inside Turkey, just to give people a perspective on that issue, because it's not really, I mean, certainly it's gone out of the mainstream media news. Of course, at one point, I think in around 2016, it was absolutely top of the mainstream media agenda. of course, now it's with Afghanistan and various other items on the news agenda, the refugee crisis, which was used very much to blackmail Turkey in particular by the EU, has now gone relatively quiet, in my opinion. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, definitely. Because 2016 was like the peak.
Yeah.
It was where, they needed the world to support this war. So it was a mass exploitation of children.
Yeah.
Incredible exploitation of children. And it was like full on emotion,
Yeah.
But it was literally international child abuse, literally.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And they've done that throughout this regime change war, to be honest. It's been a child abuse exercise with the exploitation
exactly
of children for war propaganda, save the children with bombs. I mean, it's extraordinary.
But now in 2021, we can see very clearly that the world has just lost interest in the Syrian war. They're not really concerned about the after effects. They're not really concerned about the destruction. Now, actually, they've seen that they actually have the bomb in their they have the refugee bomb in their own hands. And what are they going to do about it? So Europe particularly is panicking right now. That's why, for example, Le Pen sent people to meet with President Bashar Assad to talk about what they can do in the future, because it's literally a bomb in their hands in each country. Because uneducated person means trouble, basically.
Well, it means that they're open to radicalisation.
Exactly.
It means they're open to exploitation, and by that I mean, child trafficking, inter-country adoptions, which of course are nothing more than legalized child trafficking, organ trade, and sex trafficking. All of these, and prostitution and drugs, of course.
Through children, literally, the world is really going back to, we're losing literally 100 years of civilization, literally, because International Labour Organization, all that they want to build up on is just being thrown out the window right now in many countries. And for Turkey, this is also a very big problem, because our main market for export is Europe. So if we cannot work with children, we have certain standards that we have to abide by in order to export to Europe, and child labor is one of them, where Europe is very strict on this. So what do we do with 200 million, 2.5 million children that don't know the language, that don't know the culture, that don't have any career or any skills? And they don't have any education, and they're in a country that they can feel that they're not really wanted. This is a very big problem. So this psychology, in the long run, if it's not solved very, very quickly, it is the perfect base it is the perfect ground for new terror groups to evolve. And these people will be more radical than the previous ones, because they don't belong to any nation.
Yeah, because they've been largely uprooted. And of course, this is always part of these interventionist projects. It's to drain, it's effectively an ethnic cleansing program, right? I mean, we've seen it inside Syria. The massacres of ethnic minorities by the various armed groups backed by the US coalition and their allies, and the driving out, for example, of I think it's 3/4 of the Christians from Aleppo are now living abroad, right? They were literally driven out by the armed group occupation of Eastern Aleppo in particular, before liberation in 2016, December. And the driving out of these groups of people into neighboring countries, like, for example, Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. And then, for example, as you mentioned, the lack of education, the lack of understanding of their origins, the lack of identity, which then it creates, as you say, and I mean, this isn't, I'm almost seeing the bubble of accusations above my head of this is right-wing like mentality and ideology, you know, but it isn't. This is the thing is, what we're doing here is addressing the threat to these children, which is not addressed by the kind of liberal West that is seeing what we're saying as fascist and right-wing, etc. You know?
Well, we're not fascists, we're realists.
Exactly.
You know? And I mean, to call someone a fascist, I mean, we're not like some group like Ku Klux Klan group that joins, you know, that has meetings in every country and tries to kill everyone. I mean, this is just not it. This is not what it's about. It's literally about not seeing a very major problem that's going to evolve in about 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And it's not 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's literally now, it's happening. I mean, these people are very, very angry because they've been, you know, taken from their homes. Their future has been taken from them. So what will they do? I mean, I was in Reyhanlı last week, and Reyhanlı, as you know, is a border town. And the people that I spoke with there, they said to me every night, there's at least 200 children sleeping on the streets. They have no families. You know, I mean, how can you have street kids in Reyhanlı? It's just, I mean, this is completely out of Turkish culture.
And they're Syrian. They're all Syrian.
Yeah, they're all Syrian, by the way, all Syrian.
I mean, this is a situation which you know is absolutely ripe for exploitation by child traffickers.
Exactly, it's like the perfect recipe for you know, for terror. Then we have another major problem here where children are getting married, unofficial married, of course, getting married at the age of 10, 12, 13, and they're having babies at the age of 12. I mean, this is just, it doesn't happen in Turkey. I mean, of course, in the villages, we have some, you know, early birth rates, adolescent birth rates, but at least they're 15. I mean, to hear about 10-year-old child having, you know, becoming pregnant, or 11-year-old child becoming pregnant is just, you know, it's just shocking. Now you can see that it's a vicious circle. These children are literally being born into no future. They have no future, and we have to talk about this. We have to be realistic about this. If we're fascist, then we don't talk about this.
Yeah,
we just go ahead. You know, we just aim at the problem and then go ahead with it. But that's not reality, because we're the people that are living with this problem. Syria is the country that is living with the problem. Turkey is the country that's living with the problem. So we have to find a solution as to what will happen to these children, because if we don't find a solution now, then the region will be unstable for many, many generations. It's like, you know, I work with child abuse a lot, especially sexual child abuse. And there's a pattern in child abuse where 80% of the children that have actually been sexually abused, when they grow up, they actually become pedophiles themselves. Yeah. And it's very interesting that the age that they choose their victims is the age that they were assaulted. So you can see that it's a vicious cycle. If you are, how can I say it? If you are affected, if you're abused in some way, then when you grow up, you become the abuser as well. It's a psychological revenge. So if all your, I mean, now we have millions of children, both in Turkey, in Lebanon, but maybe not in Lebanon, but in the provinces of, for example, in Idlib and the areas, because they're not under the state control area. They're born in Syria, or they're born in Turkey, of Syrian fathers, which by the law, the constitutional law in Syria, they're natural Syrian citizens, and they cannot obtain their citizenship. Yeah, can you imagine? You are born in Syria and you cannot get your citizenship. I mean, how can I mean, this is incredible.
What is the obstacle to them getting their citizenship? They would have to come back to Syria, or are they able to do it through is the Syrian embassy still open in?
No, in 2011, we have only one consulate operating now. It's in Istanbul. But if they have to go through the embassy, we have no embassy right now here. And with regards to the areas of Idlib, of course, they're not in state hands, so they cannot give them, citizenship. But I mean, this is also something that we have to talk about, because they don't have official documents. They can just disappear and nobody even knows about them. We have a lot of, for example, a few 3 months ago, there was a very big court case where 180 children were actually found, where they were brought into Turkey to, for begging and, for these kind of operations. It was like a child trafficking team was cracked down on by our police, thank God. But I mean, the operation was really, my God, incredible, because it's a Syrian group. They go to Syria, into the areas of Idlib where it's not state controlled, and they rent the children for 3 months from their families, from the very poor families, and then they bring them to Turkey, and then after bring them to Turkey, they bring them to Istanbul, and then they have but it's all with Syrian people. There's no Turkish people in the group. All through Syrian people, and then they get these children to be, beggars, and then they sell these children over and over again. I read the court files on it, and one child is perhaps sold 4 or 5 times. And
this, of course, this is coming from, this is something that I've touched on actually in my research and my on-the-ground investigation. And of course, I was slammed by UN agencies and media in the West for even raising this subject, that groups operating in Idlib or in the terrorist-controlled areas are running organ trafficking schemes, and they're running child abduction and trafficking schemes. And as you've just pointed out, they are very likely offering the family a pittance to take their child. But this is the thing, these civilians that are living under this terrorist occupation, we know this from historically from areas that have been liberated. Their houses are taken from them and occupied by the terrorist group members. They have taxes imposed upon them. They have to pay at the checkpoints, etc., so they live in an environment of extortion, where even the humanitarian aid is stored by the armed groups and is then sold at ridiculously high prices to them instead of being given to them.
Exactly. But I mean, we have to, the point that you made before about, it's not a political issue. We have to talk about the humanitarian side. It's so important, because there's it's such a big drama that's really going on. And this drama, if we don't solve it, and if we don't look at it in a very realistic way, then it's just going to burn everyone, literally.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's the children that are being exploited and that are suffering and are quite possibly being sold off into various streams, whether it's for child labor, whether it's for pedophiles, whether it's for abuse of another kind. And this is something that it's a typical, what I call, and it's a horrible way to express it, but it's true, it's a horrible harvest of war. And we know that, even UN agency reports have stated the risk of these areas being controlled by armed groups that are out of the control of any kind of humanitarian violation groups, etc., and conventions, right? And therefore, these children are ripe for exploitation, for abduction, and nothing is really being done about it by Western NGOs, from what I can see. You might correct me there, but it's not being addressed.
but I mean, the role of the NGOs is just to create propaganda for the governments to go ahead with their agenda. I mean, we have to get realistic, and they get these stupid academics that pretend to know everything when they have no idea about what's going on. They're just propaganda parrots, literally. But what we have to talk about is also, the two faces of Europe. I mean, they talk about, humanitarianism and all this jargon. But then, for example, I mean, I read a lot of, news about, for example, lost around 15,000 children that have been lost in Germany, that they have orphans that Germany has taken. And then I read somewhere that apparently, I mean, they cannot find these children. They're all under 7 years old, but there was some kind of organization that was using these children for adoption for gay marriages. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, Europe never talks about these kind of things because they're always, full on democracy and humanitarianism. But I mean, it's just, they've just created a huge modern slave market.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And this is, and another thing, I've interviewed families here in Syria whose children have been abducted and used as an example, as props or propaganda in the narratives that are being produced by groups like the White Helmets. And exactly. I mean, this is the thing. It's this entire
Hollywood.
War is based
Hollywood
on
big time.
I mean that's the appalling thing. They won an Oscar for this kind of child exploitation. I mean, it's absolutely
ironic.
Well, ironic and horrifying for me. I mean, I have spoken to parents whose children have been abducted. One family whose child, I think he was autistic, or certainly he was mentally impaired. They know from relatives in Idlib that he's still alive and that he's being moved around with a group of children. When they're preparing potential chemical weapon attacks. This is what they told me when I spoke to them. Obviously, I can't corroborate it, but we know that child trafficking is a thing. It is happening in Syria. We know that organ trafficking is a thing. It is happening. And we know that now Idlib is the center of these operations. And so therefore, what you're seeing in Turkey is a result of these Western-backed armed group and so-called NGO operations, which include child trafficking. So they are effectively funded by the EU, right? And then the EU is turning a blind eye to these to these human rights violations that are being committed by groups they're funding. But
I mean, you have to look at the picture in the wide scope. In that, there's a generation of women, of children that have lost all their rights. I mean, in the past 10 years, for example, they have not been able to register as Syrian citizens. They have not been able to register their marriages. They have not been able to register their divorces. They have not been able to register their deaths. They have not been able to get proper ID after they're 14 years old. As you know, Syrians get they're separate from their family ID, and they get their individual ID after 14. So they cannot get their own ID, and then they cannot even claim, for example, even when a woman is divorced, I mean, unofficially, she cannot even have any rights against her husband because everything is just unofficial. So there's such a huge drama that's going on. They cannot prove their property. They cannot have any kind of, responsibility. They cannot demand any responsibility. Nothing is protecting them. So, I mean, we have to we have to go about this problem in a very, very realistic manner. For people just to turn around and to insult us. Look, for example, after our project, of course, we're sharing it with the people, with our people, is what's actually happening in our provinces in Turkey. Some guy just wrote me a tweet before. He said, well, I think, all the Syrians should rape you and then, you'll have some sense. Can you imagine this kind of language?
Yeah.
You just get on with it, because what they want and what you want is so different. I mean, we are, as a Turkish people, we come from we come from, how can I say it? It's a Turkish republic was formed by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. He has set so many guidelines as to how Turkey should modernize, and the standards of how we should, the standards that we should reach in order to become a very, very civilized society. So people like the majority of the people, like us, are very, how can I say it, are very tied to our roots regarding, Atatürk. So this is the guidelines that we live by. And then to see this kind of, abuse, it's just unbelievable. We have to do something about it. I mean, that's our goal. We have to find us. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Syria is our neighbor. And if a child, I mean, you look after your neighbor's children, basically. Yeah. So I don't want 2.5 million children to be lost. I don't want them to be in potential threat or, in danger. I want to do something about them. I want to save them. We need to save them, because not only will the area be affected by this chaos for many, many generations, and we can see, for example, in the type of people that are coming from Afghanistan. I mean, they're literally born in war, they're grown up in war, and that's their psychology. And it's not going to be different, actually. But so we need to find a solution for these people so that we can resettle the area, basically. Yeah. The dust needs to resettle, but in a proper way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the ultimate solution, of course, is that the NATO member states leave Syria, the borders are secured, and the civilians can come back into Syria and reintegrate eventually. Although, of course, this entire, well,
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, that word is so important.
Yeah.
Sorry, integration is so important, because now we can say after 10 years that the Syrian people will not integrate into Turkish society. This is very, very important, because there's certain reasons for this. One of the major reasons is because they're not integrated into the education system. So they don't have formal Turkish education system that disciplines them into what a Turkish society is. They don't have any Syrian education system, so they don't really know about the Syrian society as well. And when we look at the people that came to Turkey, it's 33% only were literate. So a very, very high number were illiterate, actually.
So that, I mean, many of them, I'm guessing, came from the rural areas in Turkey, particularly from Idlib. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now what we're seeing is, for example, children, as I mentioned before, children giving birth, but because it's against our constitutional law, under 16, you cannot have children here, and that's with parental permission. Otherwise, it's there's a prison penalty for it, because it comes into child abuse. We consider child abuse, literally, according to our constitution.
Is it, for example, is it older men taking child brides? Is that generally the situation?
Yes, but again, we see it amongst Syrians. We don't see Turkish and Syrian. We see it all amongst Syrians. I mean, I spoke with people that are saying they had their 8th wife, not 4, 8. And the guy is like 62 or 65, and the child is around 10, 12. I mean, it's just, you get sick in the stomach, literally.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely terrifying paradigm that's being established, basically.
And each child and each woman, or I mean, I cannot say woman to this age. Each child has an average of around, we have a birth rate of Syrians here 5.8. So you can imagine each, I mean, if he has on an average around 5-6 wives and every one of them has 4 children, you can imagine the population.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I mean, what is extraordinary, of course, and I mean, that still sticks in my mind, is that this level of child abuse and child exploitation, which of course has been weaponized against the Syrian state through a series of propaganda narratives and misrepresentations of reality on the ground inside Syria in the conflict. And yet the actual reality, which is the real abuse and exploitation of children, is being completely ignored, which is directly as a result of this regime change war that has been waged for the last 10 years. And it is, of course, producing this horrible, awful fallout of the Syrian population into this abyss of anonymity. As you say, that they don't have roots. They've grown up in war. They've grown up in violence. They have been abused, abducted, trafficked, exploited. You know, if there isn't some kind of genuine intervention at some point to prevent this, and hats off to you for trying to address it, you know, regardless of what criticism you get.
I don't care. I don't
No.
care about criticism, because this is my country.
Yeah.
And I don't want any child, you know, whatever his nationality or her nationality is, a child is a child. And I don't want any child to be misused, you know, and as long as they're in my country, it's my responsibility. I mean, this is just, if you're really talking about humanitarianism, then this is it. This is the bottom line. You don't look about who they are. You just, you know, you want to think about their future. What's going to happen to these children? And I mean, what personally I would really, really like to see in the future is, I know that last week, 1 week ago, the president, Mr. Assad, gave, I think it was around 46, it was a huge package of child rights. He passed a law around 46 points or something. I'm going to make a video about it, because some of them was very, very important and very interesting. They paid a very, what was very interesting was they gave a very large area space into child soldiers, and you know, which is very, it's like very realistically, you know, attending the problem head on. Yeah. You know, they talked about how these children, how the law can protect these children that were affected or active in some kind of warfare, which is I found very courageous, actually. Yeah. You know, to be very honest about such a situation. What I personally would have liked to see, I mean, it's, of course, I don't want to be rude in any way, but what I felt personally was, if, for example, the right for a woman to, how can I say it, for a child to get their national citizenship only, not through a man, but also through their mother, would also, you know, cause a lot of problems to be solved in some ways, because there's a lot of also fatherless children, right, that we can see. Yeah. You know, I mean, I was very, very pleased at what they did with the constitution, with regarding the children. I was very, very impressed, to be very honest with you. And but I can see through my studies that the fact that the women cannot give by right citizenship to their child, it's only, you know, through the man. That's also you know, a problem that maybe in the future can be attended to. But this is just, you know, someone from the outside. No, I mean, it's yeah. I mean, you know, you're working on this issue on a daily basis and on the ground basis, and so therefore you're seeing
I'm assuming what you mean is that the citizenship for the child can only, the paperwork can only be done by the father. Is that correct? Or
No,
it's through the...
No, what I mean is by Syrian law, every child born of a Syrian father is a natural Syrian citizen.
Right.
What I was intending, or would like to have seen, was every child born of a Syrian mother or a Syrian father,
right,
would be
I've
a
got
natural
you.
citizenship.
Okay.
That's what I meant, because there's a lot of marriages, as I said, child marriages, and they're not registered. They're not official. So this way we can protect also the woman, and we can protect the child. I mean, if the father says, okay, well, I don't want to marry you anymore, I don't want to be with you anymore, and they throw the woman out, maybe they got married at 10 or 11, and when she's 16, 17, she's thrown out. But if the child comes with her, at least she can have the citizenship that she can at least use for some kind of protection.
No, I understand fully now.
When you get into these kind of problems, what I've noticed is after a while, my train of thought is like, it's not really like this is Turkey or this is Syria. It's just how could we solve these children's problems? And I'm not really concentrated on the country. I'm just concentrated on the solution of the problem.
Because it's a problem for humanity. It doesn't matter whether I'm British by origin, I'm living in Syria, but I still care for these children, as we all should. And for example, you talked about education. I mean, for example, in Idlib, I know that many of the education programs are being put in place by CIA affiliated organizations, right?
And they're radical Islamic educations, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So this is that people need to understand that this is a huge danger. It's not even a political talking point, although of course it's always politicized. But it's a huge danger for these children in the future, because as we touched upon, they are living in an environment which is easily exploited to radicalize them. I mean, I remember interviewing children that had just escaped eastern Aleppo after the liberation in December 2016. And I remember talking to a group of kids, and I said to them, okay, did you go to school? They said, no, the sheikh was in charge of our education. We could only, we couldn't read any different books. We could only read the Quran. And they basically told me what they were taught, and they were brought up in an environment of sectarian violence and ideology. And so they've lived in Aleppo. It was sort of 6 years that they lived in this absolute extremism soaked environment, and it's very hard to basically clean them of that brainwashing, and that's what's happening, of course.
But we have to also ask, I mean, were they really reading it, or were they just memorizing it?
Well, yes, that's a good question. Well, I think they were probably memorizing it out of fear, because of course they were also witnessing crucifixions, executions, detainments, torture, of people that didn't comply. So I mean, these kids grew up in the 5 years of their formative years in violence, sectarian violence, torture of their own family members, for example, for daring to question the ideology or remaining loyal to the secular state of Syria. The West is basically exacerbating the situation wherever and whenever they can. They are not repairing the damage they have done. They are making it worse. And I think, this is what the West does. And people need to really wake up to this fact, whether it's with sanctions, whether it's with what we've talked about, the exploitation of children as a result of the war that has been imposed upon the region by the West, and the West is now doing nothing to prevent these children living in conditions in which they can easily be radicalized or exploited or abused. I mean, it's just extraordinary, you know.
That's why I was very, very impressed actually with the new laws that they passed 1 week ago, because they had a very, I think, if I'm not, it was around 50 or something, you know, phrases in there. Yeah. But I mean, a very considerable amount was given to children through the war stages. I mean, this is really, I thought, wow, this is really impressive, you know, because I found it very, very sincere, actually. So
I mean, that, you know, that's, it's good that people hear that also, and I'll try and find an English translation of what was put into the Constitution regarding the child protection. But, you know, this is the president that the West is accusing of gassing his own people and bombing his own hospitals and so on. And yet people in the region that see the reality of how the president has maintained stability in his own country for under a, you know, just under a hail of environmental disasters that have been imposed upon this country, whether it's war, whether it's sanctions, whether it's resource theft and occupation, whether it's ethnic cleansing, etc. You know, I mean, it's just extraordinary. And well, you're absolutely right to point this out.
At the end of the day, after 20 years of occupation, we've seen Afghanistan. Yeah. After 10 years of really one of the filthiest wars that have possibly in modern history that we've seen that, you know, the Syrian state is still managed to control over 70% of the country. Yeah. And I mean, when you look at it in the micro stage, I mean, you have even, you know, traffic police operating. I mean, this is like very, very low area, you know, when you get into the micro, not the micro. I mean, so, I mean, through everything, you've seen that stability has been really, really priority to be kept. Of course, you've gone through, I mean, I'm Cypriot. I've been through war myself. I've seen, you know, I've seen my country divided. I've seen a lot of things that, you know, a child, maybe why I'm sensitive towards the Syrian issue is maybe because of my childhood, I don't know. But after 10 years to see, you know, the country still, you know, holding up, and despite everything, I mean, to send people to the Olympics, I mean, that 12-year-old girl, I mean, I was so proud.
Extraordinary. Yeah,
I was so proud of Syria.
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
I mean, we have to talk about this. I'm not really interested in what people, you know, criticize or get angry about. I mean, if they criticize it, I just think, well, I'm just saying something that's against their interest.
Yeah, exactly. No. I mean, I couldn't care less. I mean, I've had actually everything thrown at me, you know. But the fact is, we're talking about reality, and we're talking about what we see. That's the very that's what they really can't grasp. Is we're not sat in a YouTube studio in Washington, London, or Paris, pontificating about the situation in the region. We're in the region, and we're merely transmitting what we are seeing, right? And hearing from the people that are suffering under decades of imperialist intervention in the region, in their country.
What we really have to see, Vanessa, is really, I mean, despite all this, I mean, all the difficulties that Syria has gone through, I mean, the people right now in Syria, I can see that are going through a very, very difficult time with the electricity, with the petrol, with the inflation, etc., etc. But I mean, the people are not revolting against the government. So, I mean, this is very important. We have to see this.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going through it all together. You know what I mean? I mean, you can, anyone that's sensible and can really see it in an objective way can see this.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I mean, the elections in May, I mean, that was, for me, the most extraordinary demonstration of the irrelevance of the West's roadmap for Syria. I mean, the people in their millions came out on the streets despite everything. And, you know, basically stuck two fingers up to the West. I mean, that's what it was about. It wasn't about necessarily the re-election of President Assad. It was simply the people saying, we do not accept
exactly
what you intend for us. We don't accept it.
I mean, how I read the elections, I mean, I try to give a lot of coverage of the elections. I try and give coverage of Syria a lot in my own Twitter account, because it's very important for people to see what's really going on.
Yeah.
And how I was reading the elections was that it was the Syrian people saying to the West, you will not defeat us.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't see it about the president, actually, to be very honest with you.
No,
I saw it just purely about the Syrian people saying, no, you're not going to win.
Exactly. Yeah, and whatever you do to us, we will continue resisting. You can't defeat us.
I was very, very proud of the Syrian people, to be very honest.
Oh, I mean, it was an extraordinary atmosphere here. I mean, just electrifying. I still have goosebumps now talking about it. In every province, in every city, in every region, you know, that is back under government protection, and the ridiculous reports, of course, in the West that people were forced to come out and vote.
I mean, Germany. Last minute, they forbid people from voting. I mean, how's that for humanitarianism?
Well, how's that for democracy?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and Zhazra's lot attacking the voters in Lebanon and so on.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, the West is more and more revealing itself to be the kind of facade that it really is. You know, totalitarianism and fascism, real fascism, is on the rise in Western countries, to be honest. And yet they are still wanting to impose their vision of democracy, which I believe to be a mirage anyway. You know, every culture, every civilization has a different way of governance and a different attitude towards governance. And Syria was perfectly okay before 2011. You know, it was one of the most progressive reformist states in the Middle East. And people here always talk about the stability and security they had pre-2011. And that is what they're fighting for. You know, it's not about one man. That's what people really don't understand. And because the West has portrayed it about being about one man, you know, they've targeted him just as they targeted Milosevic, as they targeted Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, etc. That's what they do. But it's not about one man.
No. I mean, what also is very, you know, very funny is that, well, they say to us, well, if Assad goes, we come back. I mean, as if the whole Ba'ath Party will also disappear immediately. Exactly. I mean, how unrealistic is this?
Yeah.
You know,
and also, you know, the people of Syria anyway will defend their secular state.
Exactly.
You know, forever, and the alternative is what? I know, a backward thinking, regressive Islamist regime that is compliant with US-Israeli policy in the region. So it's a pragmatic Sunni Islamic state, in other words, Muslim Brotherhood, which will take the country backwards by centuries. You know, and the Syrian people are simply not going to accept that. They're extremely well educated. They're extremely aware of, you know, the country has been the target of coup d'etat and interventions and assassination attempts since 1942.
So that, I mean, that's why we need to concentrate on the future of Syria, and the future of Syria is with its people.
Exactly.
So we need to, you know, take, how can I say it? We need to concentrate on what problems these young people are having right now, And that's why previously I was thinking about, the citizenship passing on to the child through the mother as well, because in the time of return, if, for example, the father is not alive anymore, or they've divorced, and the mother will be able to register children when they come back to the country.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually.
Just thinking about it, I mean, and I know, for example, Mrs. Esma Assad is very sensitive towards children. She has a lot of organizations and a lot of projects that she's really, concentrated on. I mean, I have to look at it through a very objective way, because it's about the lives of people, that if we control it now, if we look at what's going on and become realistic about it, then we can have a more stable future. But if not, then the whole region will be affected. And what Europe is really not seeing right now is, in the Middle Eastern cultures, families are very large, and they all go to areas. Some are in America, some are in Europe, some are in in Turkey, some are in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, but they're a family, yeah. And they make decisions that affect everyone in each country. So if one family decides to become radicalized, then family members in all the countries will actually have the ground to become radicalized. So Europe really needs to see that this problem is not isolated in some area. It is really, it's like cancer, and it's just gone everywhere. So if we take control of if we pay attention to what these children will, the future of these children, then the stability and the security of Europe will be much better.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, that's not only the future of Europe, but the future of these children. That they don't deserve to grow up in this environment. They don't deserve to become tools of the Saudi and Qatari sheikhs and imams that have been implanted even in European countries in order to radicalize in France, for example, the very ghetto-ised Muslim communities. And that's the problem. When Europe ghettoizes these communities, of course, it exacerbates the problem that you were just talking about.
But they're all in ghettos. For example, in Sweden, in Malmo, I mean, it's like the Vatican.
Yeah.
Police cannot go there. They have their own laws. They have their own rules. Their own mafia. They have their own tolerances. Cars cannot go in there. I mean, but what I'm trying to say is, if these young people are radicalized, then the children of the country that they're actually living in is also affected by this terrorism. It doesn't only affect the children. The local children are also affected, because they're forced to live in an environment that's not secure, and they're forced to see things that are they're not used to.
Yeah.
So it's a whole package, actually. And now we can see it in Europe, where most of the countries are now politically, they're going towards more far right political parties who are addressing this migration crisis. I mean, I cannot say it's a problem. It's literally an international crisis, and addressing it full on. And these political parties are rising. I mean, if we can see it in the German parliamentary right now, Merkel's party is doing very, very bad.
Yeah, and I mean, we're certainly seeing it in France, I think in Austria, also in a number of countries. But the problem is, of course, that this is a natural progression, the rise of whatever left and right. I mean, these days, I'm very much getting away from this left-right paradigm anyway, because it's very much more these days them against us, right? I think the left and right paradigm is there to divide us. But the problem is, what they're doing is, yes, they're addressing that, they're firefighting the problem, but what they're not doing, many of them, is going to the root cause, of course, which is imperialism and capitalism, right?
Exactly.
And that's a very important point to make. And that's what all of us who are addressing the immigration problem, the refugee problem, the weaponization of the refugee crisis, in inverted commas, which it has been. We talked about 2016, where we saw extreme exploitation of a crisis that had been created by imperialism and capitalism, right, to further the cause of imperialism and military adventurism, particularly in Syria at that point, right? And so I think unless we address that, we're not going to see any real changes. We will see the rise of the right until we start addressing the root cause of what is generating mass exodus from various countries.
I think also what people really need to start asking is, why do we have so many NGOs that concentrate on women's rights, children's rights, LGBT rights, which is very interesting, but anyway, children's and women's rights, especially, in each country. But then we turn around and have, and they have huge budgets, literally huge budgets, but then turn around and have very, very low education of the masses that supposedly they're working with. I mean, people need to ask, why, where is this money going? Exactly. Why are these people supposedly concentrating so much on children, but then the children are literally in a pathetic state?
Well, and also let's not forget that many of these organizations, Save the Children, Oxfam, have been at various times in their existence found guilty, or rather they've investigated their own abuse of children in refugee situations. You know, and I think this is something that people need to really wake up to, that these NGOs, whom they consider they're funding them to give them a stakeholding in saving humanity. That's basically how NGOs work in their marketing exercise. They are giving people who feel helpless about the horrors that are facing humanity, they can give their money to Save the Children or to Oxfam, etc., and then they've abrogated responsibility. But the problem is that those organizations are very often the ones responsible for the very abuse that they are assuming they're resolving, and that's not an exaggeration.
No, I mean, and at the bottom of at the end of the day, who is really tracking these people?
Exactly,
who is really checking where this money is going to?
Exactly,
who is actually benefiting? How much? I mean, where are they buying their sources from? I mean, it's just this huge amount of money that's circulating, and no one really knows where it's going to. And at the end of the day, it's very, very obvious that it's not going to the children.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know.
And we could talk about this forever. I mean, actually, I'm really pleased because the interview kind of went off on a tangent. It's sort of, but I think it's a very important tangent because you know, it's a subject that I've been trying to get to the bottom of inside Syria, and it's really interesting to get your perspective. And I'd actually really like to talk to you more in the future about.
My pleasure.
You know, actually reporting on this and raising awareness about it and holding the NGOs that are not addressing it to account, because you know, they're being paid to address it, and we know that actually often they're exacerbating the situation. And so for the sake of the children, this subject needs to be raised and addressed.
I mean, the price of war is always on the most vulnerable, and the children are the most vulnerable in this case. But we have to be really realistic about it. And the bottom of the line is we cannot really afford to have so many lives wasted. I mean, I'm not talking about lost. I'm talking about wasted in front of our eyes. I mean, it's just not acceptable. And I know very well because we do a lot of programs as well with foreigners as well in each country that are actually have problems with their migration problems with migration policies of their countries, and they're all complaining about the same thing, that in their own countries they have a very high they feel a very high terror threat. So it's not a problem that's going to go away. Quite the opposite. It's a problem that's going to be deepened and rooted. So we have to be very realistic about this.
Yeah. And of course, you know, we also have to be aware that this is part of the agenda. You know, if they want to create, I'm talking about the sort of the predator classes, the military industrial complex, big pharma, etc. Those that are really in charge. And of course, for them, chaos is very beneficial. We're saying that in Afghanistan, you know, chaos is being orchestrated because it serves the interests of those who have benefited from the money laundering, for example, in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. So, you know, it's also important to understand that this isn't something that is just organically arriving. Yeah, this is also part of the bigger overarching agenda, and that is why it must be addressed head on. And, well, you know, thank you for doing it.
Well, I thank you also for being so sensitive and strong, because I know that you've been through a lot as well. But at the end of the day, we have to be honest about what's really going on. If somebody is talking about the propaganda, then somebody has to talk about the truth as well.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
So I personally thank you a lot, because I learned a lot from you, actually.
Well, I mean, it was, I hope everyone finds it as interesting a conversation as I did, because this is a subject very close to my heart, and it's something that I really feel very strongly needs to be addressed and dealt with, because as you say, it's otherwise it's an unexploded bomb in the future, alongside many others, of course, but it's children, you know, that's what breaks my heart. It's children, and they really shouldn't be dealing with I mean, these kind of situations ever.
Right now, children are just like sitting ducks for exploitation.
Yeah.
And this is just not acceptable. We have to really do something about it.
Yeah. Let's leave that thought in people's minds. I think that's a very pertinent image for people to take away from this conversation. Eli, thank you so much. And stay in touch, and I will definitely be in touch to talk to you about various.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Take care, and thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.